Hello my little beauties, it's David Connolly here, the web developer extraordinaire, and today I'm giving you a video that I've been really looking forward to for a long time. This is the top 5 PHP myths busted. There are a lot of people saying some crazy stuff about PHP, and in this video we're going to set the record straight. Now, one thing I want you to know straight away is that I'm not going to be attacking anyone here, I'm not going to be insulting anyone, and I'm definitely not going to be attacking any technology. The truth is, the big secret is, I love all of the technologies, I love all of the frameworks, and even though I am going to have to compare PHP to a few things in this video, please do not take that as me bad-mouthing any technology. Not in this video, right? So we're going to be respectful, we're going to be very factual, and we'll stay away from opinions and all of that negative stuff and arguing as much as we can, okay? So let's go through these and let's set the record straight once and for all. So, myth number 1, PHP is in decline. First of all, who says this? Well, the answer is, here's a good example. This guy here, Richard Feldman, posted a video about a year ago in which he says why isn't functional programming the norm? And in this video, he's doing a presentation at some sort of event, and he actually says the words PHP is in decline. And in fact, he goes further and says that PHP is more in decline than Ruby. That's his words, not my words. There are, of course, lots of people saying that, that PHP is in decline. I'm not going to say anything against him as a person or anything like that, but I just think that he's mistaken. Oh, and by the way, at the end of the video, we're going to talk about why this happens. So I'm going to explain why well-intentioned people make these mistakes. So, the myth is that PHP is in decline. Here's the reality very quickly. PHP powers approximately 80% of the web. Now, you'll get slightly different figures. Sometimes you'll see people saying 78%. I've seen 82%. But let's just call it 80%, or even if you want, let's be really strict. Let's say that the reality is that PHP powers 79% of the web, plus or minus 2%. What does that mean? Powers. Well, it means that PHP is the dominant back-end technology. And by the way, this figure is this is a monopoly. This is an absolute monopoly, and the only other word that I could accept is stranglehold. To give you an example, here in Europe, there are a lot of people who are angry because they feel that Amazon is dominating online retail. They're calling it a monopoly. There's a lot of concern about this, right? If you go and look it up, Amazon currently has a market share of 57% of the online retail space. So what does this mean? PHP, ladies and gentlemen, is more dominant as a server-side technology than Amazon is as an online shop. This is far from decline. This is a monopoly. That's the only word that we're accepting today. Maybe stranglehold. It's absolutely incredible how popular PHP is, at least as a server-side technology. Now, if you're still not convinced and you think, well, maybe it's in decline, right? Maybe it was at 90% last week or something. Well, here's something else. This site, Packagist, is the site where most of the major PHP frameworks, I dare say most PHP developers, get their libraries from. Now, I'm not a fan of Packagist, by the way. I'm currently preparing to launch my own framework, and when that happens, Packagist and Trongate, which is the name of my framework, they're going to be sworn enemies. But in the meantime, on this day, I am Packagist's best friend. Because here on Packagist, we can look at the statistics and we can say, okay, how many packages are being added to Packagist? And there's the chart right there. And you can see this has gone back to 2012. And that, I do believe, qualifies as an exponential chart. We're going right up to 2.5 million packages up here, by the way. Now, if you look at installations, look at this. Packages installed per month. This is PHP packages per month. And look at the chart. It's absolutely exponential. Now, the first time I looked at this chart, I saw this big crazy drop at the end, and I thought, man, maybe it's not popular or something. Folks, it turns out this is the number per month. So every single month you see this big drop. Rest assured, that's going to be going higher and higher. PHP, and let's just write it down, not only does PHP power 79% plus or minus 2% of the web, but PHP is also going through exponential growth. That's the reality, and I've given you the statistics to prove that. Let's move on. Myth number 2, PHP is WordPress, or PHP is WordPress and Drupal. Again, I'll take you back to Richard Feldman here, and I'm not insulting him as a person or anything like that, but he actually says again in his presentation, and it's actually a common misconception. They say, okay, PHP's popular, but it's all mostly WordPress websites, or it's all mostly Drupal websites, and that's PHP. In this particular presentation, he even says that if you, and I'm paraphrasing, but he says if you add up all of the Drupal activity and all of the WordPress activity, then that equates to pretty much all of the PHP activity. Now, this claim that PHP is dominated by WordPress, or that the vast majority of PHP is WordPress, and maybe to a lesser extent Drupal, this claim is absolutely false. Here's the reality, ladies and gentlemen. There are some really great videos on YouTube from different sources. We've got one called You Like Data, Coders Rank, there's a few of them. And here is the reality. If we look at the most popular back-end frameworks on the planet Earth, dating back to 2012, now bring it right forward to the last few years, and you know what happens? Look at this. In first place, Laravel. Now folks, this, what you're looking at, is the most popular frameworks on the planet, and it's all here. We've got some Node stuff. I'm looking at Express. I'm looking at Django, which comes from Python. We've got Ruby on Rails. They're all here. And guess what? The most popular framework in the world, at least back-end framework, is a PHP framework. So let's write that down, right? And that's from more than one source. Again, check it out. I've given you the go back, pause, do the research. It's all there. So the reality is that the most popular back-end framework in the world is a PHP framework. At this point in time, it's Laravel, right? So you cannot be so insensitive as to just dismiss that and say that PHP's WordPress. This is grossly insensitive and completely out of touch with reality. On a personal note, I have used PHP since 2003, and I know a lot of PHP developers. I once ran a forum with 5,000 PHP developers. Do you know how many PHP developers I know who specialize in WordPress only? Been doing it since 2003, right? Do you know how many I've met who only do WordPress? One. Most of the PHP developers I know are either using PHP frameworks, one of the major ones, or using one of their own frameworks. This is so not true, completely unfair, and completely insensitive. This is the reality. Now let's move on. The next one's interesting. PHP is not a real programming language. Now, I'm not going to look up the dictionary. I suppose I could, but let's just see if we can come to some sort of sensible conclusion here. This is quite a funny one. Sometimes you see people calling PHP a pseudo-programming language and stuff like that. Okay, so this is going to take just a minute to break down, right? The question is, how do you define a programming language, right? Now, I did look up the phrase and it wasn't too helpful, by the way, a few weeks ago. So let's just figure this out ourselves, right? How do you define it? Now, I would suggest that there are three roads you can go down. You can either look at the functionality, okay? So, you know, what does it do, right? You can look at the performance, okay? Or you can look at where it sits on the stack. Now let me just run through these very, very quickly, right? So think about the things that we expect from a programming language. For example, most people would agree that HTML is not a programming language, all right? So there's certain things that make a programming language. Things like if statements, else statements, switches, functions, classes, types setting perhaps, some sort of OOP, and we could go on and on and on, okay? These are all the hallmarks of a programming language. Now, if you compare PHP to something like the Golang, or Golang, whatever we're calling it, right, which is a legitimate programming language made by Google, PHP does far more than Golang. Golang actually, I'm told, hasn't got much to it. You can apparently learn it in a couple of nights, but PHP is huge in terms of functionality. And by the way, I have written programs personally in PHP that write Word docs and that generate PDFs and that do all sorts of incredible stuff. You have no idea how powerful it is. In terms of functionality, PHP is loaded with functionality. And I'm not disrespecting Go. I'm also not disrespecting JavaScript when I say the following. The following statement is valid. Ladies and gentlemen, companies like Microsoft and frameworks like Angular use things like TypeScript so that JavaScript can be more like PHP. I chose my words carefully, and that statement is valid. Now, I'm not disrespecting JavaScript. I love JavaScript. JavaScript's arguably the greatest thing since sliced bread. I'm just saying that PHP has things like OOP out of the box and all of the stuff that people need to use things like TypeScript for if they want that type of stuff with JavaScript, for example. So in terms of functionality, PHP absolutely has all the hallmarks of a great programming language. And by the way, the syntax is remarkably similar to the C languages as well, which is kind of interesting. Now, in terms of performance, what it does under the hood, PHP is more than twice the speed of Ruby and Python. It's incredibly fast, right? Now, where it sits in the stack, this is the thing that takes a little bit of explanation, and I'm going to be entirely honest, I'm slightly out of my depth with this. I do give that disclaimer. So what I'm about to say, I think I'm right with this, but if anybody wants to correct me, you're welcome. But here's what we know is going on, at least at some level, right? Think about your computer, right? CPU or a processor, right? Now, if you get, like, think of a real programming language like C or C++ or Fortran or something like that, right? Go, something like that. Now, these are all, let's just say, real programming languages, right? Now, what do? Well, when you write something in C, it compiles, I wish I had a down arrow, but it compiles to assembly, okay? And that gets sent to the CPU or the processor, where it gets turned into machine code, right? Now, PHP was made with the C programming language, so PHP sits here. And when you run PHP, you are effectively running a C programming application. And this is why PHP sometimes gets referred to as being a scripting language. So this level is the programming language, which goes a lot more, let's say it's closer to the processor, but this higher up level here is what we call scripting languages. Now there's something really interesting that has happened, and I have to mention JavaScript again. There was a time, not so long ago, when JavaScript occupied this space. JavaScript, I started development in the mid-90s. JavaScript, when I started, was this little Mickey Mouse language, and it was part of browsers as a sort of afterthought, and you could do alerts and a few really, really simple things, you know, and it was very basic, and it was a scripting language. However, fairly recently, in the grand scale of things, Google, a team from Google at least, invented or built the V8 JavaScript engine. What happened when that was created, in my opinion, qualifies as in the top 3 most significant events in the history of computing. It's actually in league with the creation of the microchip, because what happened with JavaScript is remarkable. JavaScript went from being this. After the V8 engine came out, it went to being that. So that's why today people talk about JavaScript as a programming language, because now, thanks to the V8 engine made by the geniuses at Google, now JavaScript occupies this space, and it can rightfully be called a programming language. It's one of the reasons why JavaScript has become so popular, and it's one of the reasons why things like Node.js are incredibly fast and powerful. So congratulations, JavaScript, right? So you may hear people saying, well, PHP is still operating up at this level, so it's a scripting language, right? However, this is the scripting languages level, right? However, did you know that PHP version 8 comes with a JIT compiler? This is the latest version of PHP as I'm speaking to you. Now, what does a JIT compiler do? I'll just read it. It reads the bytecodes in many sections and compiles them dynamically into machine code so the program can run faster. Let me explain it in PHP terms as I understand it. With the latest versions of PHP, PHP finds parts of your script that are bottlenecks, that are causing the processor to do a lot of work, that are basically slowing the thing down, and PHP automatically compiles those parts, I'm reading it from here, dynamically into machine code. Ladies and gentlemen, this is major, and I believe that we are at the precipice of PHP actually doing that. And if that happens, it's going to be incredible. But already PHP is starting to nibble away at this level, and I think it's incredibly exciting. So if we go back to the thing, PHP is not a real programming language. The reality is that it has better performance than, let's say, for example, EGs, double the performance actually of things like Ruby, Python and so on, and it also has more functionality than things like Go, JavaScript and so on. And that's not disrespecting any of those languages. You could argue the case that not having a lot of features is a good thing, right? But I'm just saying it certainly behaves like a programming language. Furthermore, PHP 8's JIT compiler means that PHP can now operate at a level closer to the processor. That's the reality, ladies and gentlemen. Now, again, if anyone has any more information, I'm not an expert on that topic here, I confess. So that's how I understand it anyway, but I put it out there for you to just consider. Now, let's talk about myth number 4. We're almost there, folks, right? So myth number 4 is that PHP is for beginners. I've seen a couple of Real Tough Candy videos, and she keeps on saying PHP's for beginners, PHP's for beginners, over and over and over again. I have worked in billion-dollar industries over the years, like car leasing, for example. This is a $6 billion, actually, it's a $5 billion a year dollar industry in the UK, so it probably translates to about $6 or $7 billion if you convert that. So the car leasing market is a $1 billion market, right? So I've just searched for car leasing on Google. Now, if I take you through this, you see that Select, that's owned by a guy called Mark from Manchester. I built for him. You see, let's see, Intelligent. I've not built for them, but I know the guy Martin, and I've integrated his quotations with another site. See First Vehicle here? I worked for them for 14 years, one of the biggest car leasing companies in Europe. Frontier, I've built for them as well. And as we go through here, I know First Vehicle, I built it, and actually I didn't build this version of the site, but I've worked for them. What Car? I know the guy who owns that. Last time I met him, we chatted about web development for half an hour, and I bought a car off of him. I know these people, and I know this industry. Now, this is a $1 billion industry, and I'm intimately familiar with things like search results. Now, why does this matter, and why am I showing you this? Here's why. Because when you look at $1 billion industries, like car leasing, or even things like home insurance, right? Or loans, or any of the big money phrases. I'm not talking about green leather handbags. We're talking about the big, giant phrases, right? What you will find is that when you get a company like this, like, who on earth is Shawbrook? I've never seen this site in my life. Is that an advert? Difficult to tell. It's not an advert. Right, here's a site that you and I have never seen before. Now, let's click on it. Let's click on it. I think I know what's going to happen. So, as we click on this site, we did a search for loan. What do we see? We see a lot of text, right? Now, let's just right click and view the page source. Now look at this. What do you see here? Text, right? Source code. Source code that almost reads like an essay. How did I know that that was going to happen? Ladies and gentlemen, I knew that was going to happen because that's what $1 billion industries are like. Now, JavaScript people, I love you, and I'm not disrespecting your technology, but you will not see a single page JavaScript site such as an Angular powered site on page 1 for $1 billion industry. It just doesn't happen if we're talking about a prestigious search phrase anyway. So here's the reality. The reality is, and I'm going to paste this in because I want to get this right. The reality is 90% of web development clients ask for SEO. That's my experience. Been doing it since 1996. So 90% of your clients are going to have an interest in SEO. That doesn't mean they're going to say, will you do the SEO? It means that they're either going to say, can you get it to page 1? Or they're going to say, hey, we're going to hire somebody who's going to get it to page 1. Now, regardless of who does the SEO, one of the key variables that any good search engine optimization consultant will tell you, one of the key variables is source code. Now, since PHP is more than twice the speed of Ruby Python, makes it extremely Google friendly, right? And since PHP produces easily readable source code, this means that it's relatively easy to optimize PHP sites for search engines like Google. All of this makes PHP attractive to web development prospects and clients. So the reality is not that PHP is for beginners. The reality is PHP is for business. It's for professionals. Now, I don't know about employees and all of that stuff, but for people who are in the business of getting to the top of Google, competing in billion-dollar industries, they love PHP. They cannot get enough of it. Next, I saved the best for last, ladies and gentlemen. I saved the best for last. PHP is outdated. And again, we've heard it over and over and over again, right? PHP is outdated. I think our friend Richard says that phrase, in fact, PHP is outdated. Here is the reality. I'm going to take you right now to Google News. Okay, in fact, do I have Google News open here? I have it open here. Right, okay. So I'm going to do a little search on Google News for PHP, right? Let's just do this here. And look at this. Look, that was an accident. Look, 5 reasons why PHP is still a great language. Let's see what they're saying about PHP. Oh, look at this. 2020's fastest rising tech jobs, PHP leads the way. And have a look, ladies and gentlemen. It says PHP developer roles have increased a massive 834% since January 2020, making it the fastest growing tech job across the industry. That's absolutely incredible. And by the way, you may think, who's ZDNet or ZNet or something like that? They're saying according to Indeed's data. That's the biggest job searching website on the planet. So those who say that PHP is outdated, well, guess what? PHP developer roles have increased by 834% this year. I'm calling that a home run. And on this day, I am declaring that all of these PHP myths have been busted. At least I may have been a little bit shaky on the third one, but hopefully I bungled my way through that. But isn't it incredible? Isn't it absolutely incredible? And it's funny how even people who support PHP, they talk about it in a defeated manner. Now, why does this happen? And please, just for once, let's be intelligent. Let's not be insulting. And, let's just assume that everybody has great intentions and we love all of their languages. I'm not saying that you should stop what you're doing, okay? Don't stop what you're doing. It's awesome. Your thing is awesome. But why are people saying so much crap about PHP? I believe that there are 3 main reasons. The first one, academia. PHP, for reasons unknown, has been to a large extent ignored in academic circles. In other words, it doesn't get taught at university, at least not significantly. Those who leave university with computer science degrees typically come out having learned Python or C# or something along those lines, but not PHP. Now just look at the logic here, and there's no need to get emotional about this. If you had gone to university for 4 or 5 years and you'd studied really hard and you came out into the marketplace and you come out and you're looking for work, you're full of debt, right? You've acquired all of this debt, and to your horror, the marketplace is ignoring .NET and ignoring all of the stuff that you were taught. And to your horror, this is happening. This pseudo language is basically monopolizing the web. Let's face it, you would be furious. You would be up in the middle of the night writing articles saying this is a terrible language. It's not even real, it's the worst thing ever. And that's precisely what has happened. It's been going on since 2003, and throughout the years, whenever the various complaints are dealt with, it doesn't have OOP, it doesn't have typesetting, it allows you to inject variables via the URL. I could go on and on and on. whenever these things are addressed, the naysayers never, ever say a good word about PHP, because who can blame them? There's a lot of people in academic circles who are very angry, and who can blame them? They're coming out into a marketplace that does not care about what they know. So there's that. Second reason, big tech. Let me take you back to the why isn't functional programming the norm video. Now, this video has got over 700,000 views. That is a staggering amount of views. I'm not even sure if PewDiePie gets views like that, right? It's an astonishing amount of views. But what's interesting, if you look at the channel, this channel only has 5.4 thousand subscribers. I mean, even my own tiny channel is bigger than that. So we've got a small channel with massive, massive amounts of views. So what on earth's going on here? It doesn't make sense. Well, we all learned a new phrase this year, right? Turns out that YouTube pushes videos. And so what happens is, for reasons we don't quite know, certain videos get pushed by YouTube. It's just a fact. I was looking at a video a couple of weeks ago from a guy who's a beekeeper. I'm not into beekeepers, but this video appeared and I watched it and it had like 1 million views. And the guy was like, I don't know what happened, but YouTube just pushed this video for some reason. That's just what YouTube does. Now, the question is why? Well, who owns YouTube? Who owns YouTube? Alphabet, the company who own Google. And what do Google sell to web developers? Hosting, right? So YouTube is owned by Google or Alphabet, and they're trying to sell hosting. What kind of hosting do they sell? Cloud hosting. With what? Functional programming. So companies like Amazon are pushing things like AWS Lambda, and Google have their equivalent, Microsoft have their equivalent. Now, for reasons that I'm not going to go into in this video, maybe I'll go into it in another video, but there are technical reasons why those big data warehouses favour functional programming. It's all to do with they want you to be able to use websites and have your computer not loaded with state. In other words, they don't want you to use things like session IDs and cookies and stuff like that. If you own a big data warehouse or a content delivery network like Google, like Amazon, and like Microsoft, it's absolutely in your interest to have people believing that functional programming is awesome and let's all sign up for Lambda or Firebase or whatever. It's absolutely in your interest. And on the other hand, PHP is a thorn in the side of the big tech companies. Again, there's a lot of technicalities here. I don't want to go into it all, but let's just imagine that your website is hosted in a warehouse in Ireland, and then suddenly Ireland make it to the final of the World Cup, or some event's going on, and that data warehouse is getting flooded because there's some streaming event. And what happens? Well, CloudFront kicks in, the video gets backed up, sent elsewhere, blah, 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 blah. If you're using something like PHP with sessions and cookies, this is a massive technical headache. This is why big tech favours functional programming. And I've been in the industry long enough to remember the day when Amazon first decided they were getting into this, and they weren't hosting websites. They were saying you can store your files here. The whole business of companies like Amazon hosting sites and Google is actually relatively new. And in order for them to do that, in order for them to make their data warehouses suitable, they have to convert a lot of people towards this way of thinking here. So big tech is one of the reasons why this happens as well. Finally, the third reason why PHP gets a lot of bad press is because of stability. And here's what I mean by that. Let's imagine you've got two Udemy instructors, right? And one of them teaches the latest red hot JavaScript framework. Let's say something like Angular or something like that, right? And let's imagine you've got another Udemy instructor who teaches Fortran 77, right? So you've got an Angular person going up against somebody who teaches Fortran 77. Now, by the way, do you know what the 77 stands for? That's the year when it was released. Now, let me ask you a question. I know that we've got a programming language here and we've got a JavaScript framework. Okay, but here's a question. Which one of these two things do you think is the most bleeding edge? Which one of these two things do you think is the fastest? Which one of these two things gets used to design aircraft wings? It's Fortran 77. I did Fortran 77 at university, and Fortran 77 is the predominant programming language for aerodynamics, and it still gets used in civil engineering and all sorts of real-world applications. Fortran 77 is actually the fastest or joint fastest programming language up there with the C's. It's a bullet. But the thing is, Fortran 77, well, it was made in 77, so there's not much to talk about. The Udemy instructor who does Fortran 77 has got one course, maybe an update every 5 years or something, but it's tumbleweeds, right? I could have said the same with C, by the way. The C language is about 40 years old, right? But the Angular Udemy instructor, think about it, right? The Angular instructor, that person's looking at new versions maybe 2-3 times a year. And so they have a constant stream of new stuff coming up. They have all sorts of events. Have you ever seen the launches? Have you ever seen the conferences? It's like a rock concert. And it's like, yeah, look what we've got this month. Yay! Did you buy your teddy bears and your hats? Your Go Angular hats? So the point is, and it's nothing against Angular. I mean, well done Angular, right? It's nothing against anything. But I'm just saying that the, let's call them hipster technologies, if they constantly have new events, new features, new versions, new this, new that, new the next thing, that's going to create a lot of activity. New courses, there's going to be a steady stream of YouTube tutorials, books, all of that stuff. Meanwhile, the poor sinner who teaches C, well, it's going to be tumbleweeds because it's hardly changed for the past 40 years. But again, did you know that the C language, that gets used in stealth fighter jets and M1 Abrams tanks? Don't assume that this is some rubbish thing just because it has stability. On the contrary, it's one of the most performant programming languages ever. And the reason why they use the C language in tanks is because when you send a tank out to a battlefield, it has to perform, it has to be fast, and it cannot break down. So here's the point, ladies and gentlemen. PHP is incredibly stable. I can count on one hand the amount of times when a breaking change has been added to PHP. You know, when a new version comes out and I need to go back and change an app because they changed something, I can count it in one hand and I don't even need to use my thumb. PHP is remarkably stable. It's rock solid. So what that means is that once you've done your course and once you've read your book, well, there's nothing much to talk about. It's tumbleweeds. But meanwhile, the people who are into things like React and Angular and Vue and whatever else people are into, even Swift, which seems to be going through quite a lot of versioning right now, and God bless them all, but they have stuff going on, you know, events, versions and courses and channels and all of that stuff. When you have something that has rock solid stability, well, that's great. But unfortunately, it's not good for attracting attention. Do you see what I'm saying? So PHP is a victim of its own stability. Folks, we're going to wrap it up there. I know that this has been quite a long video, and thank you for watching. I just wanted to set the record straight with this stuff, and I'm grateful for your attention. Never let a guy like me tell you what programming language you should use. Do your own research, and as always, the best programming language is the one that makes you feel good.